we get started with our interview with Scott Keepfer, I want to take a moment to tell you about our title sponsors who have made the Orange Crush podcast possible. First, we want to thank Herb Tyler and Clemson and Seneca Chick-fil-A. It's a noon kickoff against NC State. Why not grab a chicken biscuit or get some catering for your friends and be the king of tailgating? We also want to thank Lisa Nason and Nason Accounting over in Greenville, South Carolina. These two title sponsors have been critical to keeping the podcast afloat and making sure we can do what we can with our awesome guests. And obviously, David and I appreciate it. And we hope you do too. Go check them out. Thank you. And now let's get to Scott. Another week, another important game for the Tigers, and another star-studded guest. My name's Grayson Mann alongside David Hood. Welcome to the Orange Crush podcast. And today we have Scott Keepfer, former reporter at the Greenville News, legendary reporter. I want to emphasize the legend in that. It's good to see you again, Scott. NC State alum. We got some ball games to talk about, man. How you doing?
Doing, you guys.
Scott, what year did you start working at the Greenville News? How long have we known each other?
1989.
So I was in and out of the Greenville News at that time because I was in college, kind of in and out. But we met. It is 1989. We've known each other a long time. I remember meeting a dark-headed, skinny dude over there by, I think, maybe Marion Elliott's desk. You probably don't remember that, but we were passing there in the newsroom, and I stopped and introduced myself.
I remember that. Yes. Yeah, we go way back.
Now, rumor has it that the reason that you went to NC State, you were born in a small town in North Carolina, 12, 13 people. Raleigh was the first big city that you ever visited, and you decided that you wanted to go to school there, right? You saw electric lights and indoor plumbing, and you're like, this is it. This is where I'm going to school.
We were traveling to Clayton near Raleigh for a football championship game in high school. Our activity bus drove by Crabtree Mall, and one of the guys on the bus rolled his window down and said, "Look, man, it's a 2-layered mall." And I guess that was the main selling point, to find a 2-layered mall.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So, Scott, so we talk about, and I mentioned it in the little intro here, about your legendary status. And our TigerNet listeners, whoever's listening to this podcast, watching this podcast, is definitely going to know the name. So what got you into sports reporting and sports journalism as a whole? Just sort of walk our audience through what led you to that path.
At NC State, I wandered up into the student newspaper office one day after seeing an ad in the student paper for writers wanted. I said, heck, maybe I could give that a shot. And the sports editor at the time, Devin Steele, I guess saw something in me and sent me to a women's soccer match. And I went and covered it and came back, and I guess that was enough for him. So I guess he figured anybody that returned after that deserved a shot. And it built from there. Found myself covering NC State basketball and football in 1983. So I think Jim Valvano was the person who most influenced me. I was a forestry major and was too far into that curriculum to retrace any steps or change majors. So I took all the journalism courses that NC State offered and got a minor in journalism. I was going to go home and be a park ranger, in the Great Smokies. And but Jim Valvano convinced me otherwise. And at that time, I said, all coaches are going to be just as entertaining and fun-loving as Jim Valvano. I later found out that wasn't quite the case, but that was an amazing experience, following them to the national championship, and that began my whole career. I started at the News and Observer in Raleigh, covering high school stuff, and then went to the Fayetteville Observer in Fayetteville, and in 1989 came to the Greenville News, and have been there ever since, until recently.
Did your path cross with Tim Peeler at any point at NC State, or was that later?
I kind of hired Tim at the student newspaper.
Did you really?
Yes.
Now, for people that don't know, Tim Peeler later came to work for I think he might have started to work for the Piedmont first,
Yes.
on the afternoon
And
side, and
yeah,
then and now he's back as kind of a legendary historian,
yes.
Peter Francis Emeritus kind of a guy up at NC State. But we worked with him for a long time.
He had to endure the very rough years at NC State. The football coaches when I was there were Monty Kiffin and Tom Reed, if that tells you anything. So finally in '86, Dick Sheridan came and kind of from Furman and kind of got things going. I think the feeling at the time was if you can't beat Furman, just hire their coach away, and it did work out pretty good for State.
Now, Scott, you and I have talked a lot over the years about NC State, and I say that is a football program that should be better than it has been historically. The fans care. They invest in the facilities. They care more about it than North Carolina. They care more about it than Wake Forest. They care more than Duke, the other schools up in that area. Never have really gotten over that hump, have they?
It's sad to see. I mean, they haven't won an ACC championship since 1979. If you can process that, it's just yeah, they deserve better. Put it that way. I mean, it's been a long, hard road, and I guess at this point you could say that Dave Doran has at least given them some consistency. You know, they tend to win 8 or 9 games a year, but they just can't get over that double-digit win hump. And I'm sure it's frustrating to the fan base, which has been tremendously loyal and very supportive. You know,
Yeah, when you look at NC State, especially a program this year, I felt pretty high on them just because Doran, you mentioned that consistency and what they're able to do last year with the quarterback carousel at hand. And then you add a player like Grayson McCall and someone that, depending on who you ask, I feel multiple time winner of the Sun Belt Player of the Year, quarterback that I'm pretty high on as an NFL prospect becomes, and it hasn't been exactly what NC State fans have pictured out. A close one against Western Carolina, a thumping against Tennessee, and now McCall is listed with an undisclosed injury. And if you find out, Doran may have a red dot pointed at your chest at some point. It feels like it's very tight lid over there in Raleigh. Just what have you seen from the Wolfpack so far? And just entering this Clemson game, what can fans expect from this ACC squad?
so I think the hopes were high with Grayson and a few of the other transfer portal guys that they secured, but things haven't gone as swimmingly as they had planned. I mean, you know, they trailed Western Carolina in the third quarter. They trailed Louisiana Tech in the third quarter and just absolutely got bludgeoned by Tennessee. And I think a lot of state fans were hoping that, you know, they would at least offer a challenge to Tennessee, and they didn't even do that. And now Grayson's on the shelf. So one Grayson is out. Is Grayson Mann? Are you good to go Saturday? Are you?
I haven't thrown a football like that since I tried at quarterback in eighth grade, so maybe, who knows? I wouldn't certainly reveal that to the public, Scott. I think we're going to keep that a secret. That
Okay.
this
Game day decision.
underwhelming, I don't think they want this underwhelming athlete that is out of breath when he walks up the stairs to be quarterback, but who knows?
Remember,
Now,
he had to stretch for a Zoom call, so that probably tells you all you need to know.
I got to. It's important. You gotta get ready.
so now they've got this C.J. Bailey, the freshman, who basically saved their bacon last week against Louisiana Tech, and he's a big, rangy 6'6" kid who looks very thin, but is obviously has some talent. But you know, a starting assignment is starting your first game at Clemson in Death Valley. You know, it's going to be quite a task for him.
Yeah, so
I think.
I enlisted the help of the great Tim Beret on this, and I went back to try and find out. Not only is he, a freshman quarterback playing in Death Valley, he is making his first ever collegiate start in Death Valley. And so Beret and I both went back all the way to 1980, and we cannot find where a freshman has ever won a first start in Death Valley. And in fact, since 2000, only 4 freshman quarterbacks have won in Death Valley. That's since 2000. including Chris Ricks, redshirt freshman, Tyrod Taylor, I think was the only true freshman in that bunch. And then you have to go back to 1989 with Sean Jones at Georgia Tech. And then you have to go all the way back to 1980 with the great Ben Bennett coming in as a true freshman and winning. None of those were a first start.
The odds are stacked against the Wolfpack, obviously. And what's the latest line? I started like 12, and then it was 17, and now it's 19. Does that sound right?
I think last night it was up to 20 and a half.
Okay.
My Lord. Yep, 20 and a half.
State's got some issues, and what I've seen from them is what's really disappointing is they had a very veteran offensive line with four graduates and one redshirt sophomore. So they had some experience, and they thought that might be a strong suit. But boy, did they get manhandled by Tennessee. And Clemson's defensive line is comparable, if not as good. And I think that could cause them some issues.
Yeah, when you talk about veteran offensive line, something that's been a nice, not maybe surprise to some, but it's been a nice boost is the Clemson offensive line and the way they've been playing under Matt Luke. I guess just flipping it conversely to the other side with the Tigers, Scott, it's also been sort of a weird roller coaster through 3 weeks. You have the Georgia thumping where it's a competitive first half, but the gas eventually just runs out and Georgia runs away with it. And then you have what looks like the Trevor Lawrence, Deshaun Watson thumpings with App State, where you score on 8 straight drives, you set records on records on records, and now you have this open date where it's this weird pause. And so not only are we going to figure out, okay, how do they handle that sort of break, but what kind of team is this? Because there's some sort of happy medium they're going to find. And I think, honestly, I'm not too sure where it lands. Do you have an idea, Scott, of where you think this team will find that happy medium? Will it be on Saturday?
Clemson fans hope so. And I'm sure that, that App State game, I guess, kind of gave us a glimpse of what this offense can look like, but how good is App State? We're not really sure about that either. Look, it's going to be a proving game for Clemson. I mean, they need to open up quickly because for the one thing NC State has done, it has improved greatly in the second half of each of their games, except for the Tennessee game, of course. But so I think Clemson's strategy should be to maybe deliver some knockout blows early and flash those freshman receivers. I mean, I don't know that NC State's secondary is all that proven. And so I think there's some opportunities for Clemson to deliver some early knockout blows and kind of set the tone for the game.
And if Clemson's defense has had an Achilles heel so far, and I asked Wes Goodwin about this Tuesday, is setting the edge or letting players get out on the perimeter. That's what Georgia did in the second half. App State had success with it. They've got a little cat by the name of Casey Concepcion who can flat out move. And I can remember watching him at Dabo Sweeney's high school camp and seeing him come in and going, okay, there's the quick twitch that you're looking for. Clemson really never got involved. NC State takes him. He's been amazing. And Dabo says we're going to see him maybe in the Wildcat. He's going to line up at wide receiver. He's going to be on the outside, the inside, maybe in the backfield. What kind of playmaker do they have in Concepcion?
The guy who, I guess NC State beat Clemson because Clemson doesn't recruit many 3-star guys. Clemson's focused on the 4- and 5-star guys. And believe it or not, Concepcion was a 3-star guy who, man, he pretty much set the world on fire last season, and his versatility is just incredible. They get him the ball in so many ways. He's you just feel with him on the field, you've got a chance. He's electric, and to me, that's the difference. Well, this is why NC State hasn't been able to get over the hump when it comes to recruiting. Doran hasn't even been able to build a wall around North Carolina. if you look at their recruiting every year, um, they're beating Old Dominion and App State and Louisville for guys. They're not going toe to toe and winning many battles against Clemson or even Florida State or anybody like that. It's just I don't know what it is, but these other teams have a track. Clemson has a great track record of recent success, and that appeals to a lot of players. I just was looking at the top 10 players from last year's recruiting class. None picked NC State. I mean, how does that happen? And I'm saying the top 10 players in North Carolina. So and this year it looks like NC State might have a chance at 2 of them out of the top 10 from their own state. And if you can't, kind of build a wall, or at least a semi-permanent wall around your own state, that doesn't bode well for your future.
Yeah, when you look at what Concepcion was able to do last year, it felt like he single-handedly at certain points was able to carry the Wolfpack and deliver Clemson its 4th loss of the season and sort of even further spiral that season downwards. And so I think it reminds me a lot of 2022, where NC State in 21, they beat Clemson at home. And then there's this sort of not energy or aura to it, but it's just, we have to avenge this loss. This rivalry means something. And so, Scott, in your time, and especially when Dabo Sweeney brought it up on Tuesday, he said, yeah, many people don't call it the Textile Bowl anymore, but it means something to people in the area, and Raleigh and Clemson. This is a rivalry that still matters. In your time covering this series, just what are some maybe memorable moments, and just what does this rivalry truly mean to these communities?
Oh, wow. It saddens me to think that they're not going to play for what, 2 years after this?
I think 2027. Right.
Yeah, man, that's just, come on. NC State and Clemson should play every year, but hey, welcome to realignment, right? There's been so many great games between these teams that I remember, 2002 when NC State had Phillip Rivers and P.A. McClendon kind of ran wild in that game at Clemson, and heck, that's the last time State won at Clemson. What, 22 years ago? Quite a drought. And then there was the Torrey Holt game. David, you probably remember that.
I do.
Where Torrey Holt went absolutely bonkers. I think he had 4 touchdowns, and State won at Clemson 46-39, something like that.
46-30, that's right.
Yeah,
the Woody game up in Raleigh, up at Carter Finley. Remember when Woody ran wild?
Yes. Oh, it's just, I mean, when these two teams get together, it's just fun, right? I mean, and it pains me to think they won't play for 2 years. Yeah, I can't stand that. But I was also thinking yesterday about, a lot of Clemson fans like to look at Dave Doran as the villain. I think Dabo actually likes Dave Doran, if you got to the bottom of it. They're very competitive. They both got the juice going, and I guess it stems from the laptop gate and the when they're an assistant coach at NC State that pushed or took a swing at Deshaun Watson on the sideline years ago. I mean, all these things that kind of have added up over the years. But I think the bottom line is that
Chubb stealing the towel, Bryant all the time.
Oh yeah, a lot of antagonistic stuff unfolded in this series, and but I think if you put Deb on the spot, he would say, "Oh, I kind of like Dave," and I think Dave respects and likes Dabo.
We were talking about the wall around North Carolina. I have often said, if I'm the head coach at NC State, you have some of those programs up in North Carolina, the high school programs, whether it's Greensboro Page, Huff in Charlotte, Crest, down near the South Carolina. There's just so many of those legendary programs. If I'm Dave Doran, I live in those high school coaches' offices. And I go, you know what? You're not getting away from me. You're not. Your guys are going to go where we are, and you start there. It's kind of like I have a friend of mine who coached high school football up in Louisville, and he was at one of the bigger programs, and he said that his entire time there, Bobby Petrino never walked into his office, not once. And he said, so all of our kids wound up going to Kentucky. They would go to Georgia to play. They'd go out of state to Virginia to play, but none of them would ever stay home. And if you're going to be successful at NC State, you got to go after those programs. You got to set up a residence in Greensboro. How many great players come out of that area, right? And say these kids aren't getting away.
Starting to realize that, and we'll see if he makes progress in that regard. But he has been camping out in Charlotte area a lot, where Concepcion's from, and I did notice they signed Casey's little brother, Arion Concepcion. So if he turns out to be even a fraction as good, they'll land Jim and him. So, but yeah, you're right. I mean, the Greensboro area has been prolific and really beneficial to Clemson if you look at their recruits from that area over the years.
Well, when you look at this game, what's a key for NC State? What is a key for Clemson? And how do you see this one kind of playing out?
Well, I think for NC State, you have to have this freshman quarterback not lose confidence early. I mean, when he came in against Louisiana Tech, the first thing he did was throw a pick, but he was able to recover from that and looked pretty darn good over the final quarter and a half. If he comes out against Clemson and bad things happen in a flurry, it's really going to set him back. And obviously, you need KC Concepcion to get off on the right foot, break some tackles, break some runs, catch some balls, make some big plays, and that'll juice up the whole receiving corps. They've got Noah Rogers, the transfer from Ohio State, who we haven't really heard a whole lot, but man, when you look at him, he's full of potential. I mean, he just needs to put it together. Maybe he could have a breakout game. Who knows? For Clemson, I would look for, carryover from the App State game. Just rely on those two young receivers who just showed out when they finally got the opportunity. And I would think that Klubnik probably gained a pretty good jolt of confidence from his performance in that game. And I think Clemson's offensive line has the potential to be dominant. And if that happens, they may cover that spread.
Do we have a score prediction from you, Scott? I don't want to put you on the spot like this, but
wow. NC State's defense isn't what it has been, obviously. When you lose Peyton Wilson, that kind of takes the heart and soul of your unit, of the equation. I think maybe Clemson 35-17.
There you go.
That's about
That'll
right.
be my pick.
Sounds good about that. David, do you have any more final questions here with Scott before we wrap up today's episode?
Yeah, Scott, one final thing, and I know that you've probably seen this, but the other night, Ross Dellinger of Yahoo wrote that Clemson, Florida State, and the ACC are in kind of the early, whatever you want to call it, conceptual infancy stages of perhaps taking a look at increasing revenue for Clemson, for Florida State, but not necessarily for those two, but for the teams that actually carry the conference from a monetary standpoint. In other words, if NC State was to make the playoff, they would get, a lion's share instead of having to share with everybody. But it is to appease why Clemson and why Florida State have taken the ACC to court. I wrote an article yesterday saying Clemson would take a look at this to see if it would make monetary sense. Because, look, we all know, and I've been told, we're all kind of pointing toward the end of this decade, right? Because we know there's going to be another seismic shift in the college football playoff, the way that it's, operating. We know that that's probably when the next wave of expansion, realignment will happen, and we could go to 2 super conferences or 3 super conferences, or the top 40 or 50 break away. It's all heading that way. And we know that ESPN's running things. But when you take a look at this, and knowing that you would have to convince 12 ACC presidents, 2/3, to take a little of their profit away, and hey, instead of the 18 million that you've been, nursing on the tit of the ACC, you're going to get 9 or whatever. Does this have a chance of making it?
Yeah, I think it does. I think it does. It's just, the power wielded by Florida State and Clemson should not be underestimated. Although I had to chuckle the other day when David Hale wrote that Florida State's start to their season may lessen their power of demand, and that maybe they could get out for the standard exit fee and some Kohl's cash is what he wrote. So who knows? They're certainly not helping their case with this start, but no, I think it has potential. I mean, and I think if the other presidents realize that, if we don't concede this, it could ultimately mean the demise of this conference as we know it. And look, I followed the ACC since I was a kid, and I just think it would be a sad state of affairs to see it completely dismantled.
I do too. And the way that Clemson and Florida State look at it is you have Syracuse. They've never invested in their facilities up until now. Now they've kind of got an indoor, right? Boston College. They don't invest in anything football related or basketball related or really baseball related, right? There's just these schools that don't have the same passion, the same financial commitment that others do. And so when Clemson would go to a college football playoff and you'd have that payout, Syracuse would make the same as Clemson. Boston College would make the same as Clemson, right? Because they had to split it with the ACC. That's what they want to get away from. And these presidents, I think, will realize that, because what would happen if Clemson and Florida State leave the ACC? NC State's going to go to the Big 12. Virginia Tech's probably going to go to the Big 12, right? And all of a sudden, you cease to be a viable conference.
And yet, everything's off the table. All bets are off. I mean, oh boy. I mean, what do you just do? Try to preserve Duke and just be a basketball conference? I don't know.
That's
I
it.
can't even imagine what that would look like,
We'll probably find out pretty soon, depending on how things play out, Scott. There may be some, as David points, I feel like the next move is somewhere under the table, and it's just going to get pulled out from under it. It's going to be fun.
I'll be watching for sure.
That's right. And you'll be watching plenty of TigerNet coverage on Saturday for Clemson and NC State. We want to thank Scott. Do you have any final words before we wrap this thing up, man?
No, just, and actually I will be at the game just as a spectator for the first time in a long time. And so kind of looking forward to sitting back and just watching the fun unfold.
Wait, are you going to be wearing an NC State shirt?
No. I'm too neutral for that.
None of this? I do miss you sitting down to my left in the Clemson press box. I miss seeing you down there. I do.
A little weird, to be honest with you, but I'm adapting to not having to work.
It's got to be pretty nice.
Well, Scott, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Join you guys.
Absolutely. That was Scott Keepfer here with Greenville News. Guys, we want to thank you for tuning in. And if you've listened through all the way here and you haven't subscribed or followed us on Spotify, what are you doing? Go ahead and take care of that. And thank you for all the continued support. David and I will be on deck on Saturday for some coverage of the ACC opener. Super exciting stuff as we roll on. This was the Orange Crush Podcast. Grayson Mann alongside David Hood. Thank you for listening and have a great day.